If I were to list my top 10 horror movies of all time, they'd almost certainly be all movies from the 1960s, 70s and 80s. But there is one exception. Though only released in 2018, Hereditary already has a firm place in my top 10 horrors of all time because it's downright scary and because it's got enough layers of psychological depth to justify multiple rewatches and multiple interpretations. So if you don't own a copy of the film, then I suggest you get one. There's a fascinating thing that happens with movies that tap into very real depths of human psychology, such as the schizoid love-hate relationships we often have with close family members, and the potent concoction of feelings we have for those people when they die. Hereditary goes heavily into those uncomfortable subjects in ways that very few movies have ever done. When a movie connects to those kinds of very real psychological issues, things that we are semi-conscious of, but which hardly ever get spoken about, the movie in turn triggers all kinds of thoughts about ourselves and the people around us, being that those deep psychological issues don't exist in cognitive isolation. They're woven into the vast web of our subconscious. In this way, a movie like Hereditary can tap into far more subconscious truth than the filmmakers even intended. But there's an added effect in horror stories. Most supernatural stories we can sort of brush off as being silly, but when a ghost story carries deep psychological truths as part of the package, it lends emotional credibility to the supernatural plot. The Exorcist, The Shining, Rosemary's Baby, Poltergeist, and The Thing, even though it's not officially a supernatural film but it may as well be, all these horror classics carry with them very strong human stories, and, extremely important, they've got good acting. The emphasis on convincing human reality locks us in and makes us more accepting of the implausible. For these reasons, I think Hereditary will be talked about for a very long time to come and will be ranked among the classics, even in 30 odd years. I'm not going to go into any further depth on all that family psychology stuff in this video though. There's enough of that in Hereditary for a separate video of its own. Instead, we're going to explore how the film achieves its sense of pervading dread through an onslaught of minute psychological trickery. Little details that carry sneaky plot implications, hinting toward a complex backstory that's never outright explained, as well as basic hypnotic techniques such as distraction, misdirection, and so on. When I first saw the movie in the cinema, I kept thinking throughout the movie that I was seeing figures or faces hidden in the dark rooms and hallways of many scenes. The camera would either sit stationary or creep slowly and silently through sets that were only lit enough to just about make out items such as furniture props, ornaments, and so on. And as typically happens with the human mind, if you reduce sensory information, we tend to fill in the blanks by imposing patterns we expect to see. That's why silence and being alone is so scary for a lot of people. It amplifies the subconscious voices in our own heads and makes us confuse barely audible sounds with imagined ones. And the same happens visually. Switch the lights on and everything's all clear, but dim the lights right down and our brains struggle to make sense of limited information by forcing us to see patterns that aren't there. Of course, it is standard of ghost movies to do that, but it was only on my third viewing of Hereditary that I noticed in this shot of Peter waking up in bed near the end of the film. This is before his terrible trauma at the hands of the demon right before he gets possessed. In this shot, possessed Mother Annie is silently hiding in a dark ceiling corner behind him. And I thought, how the hell did I miss that in my first two viewings of the film? What I think happened is that because there are so many dark sets preceding this, where we expect to see horrible things but don't, the film had lulled me into a false sense of security. I'd stopped consciously looking for the figures in the dark because there were none, especially after seeing this, which looks very ghostly, but it's nothing. So it's a great piece of misdirection set up slowly throughout the movie, creating a psychological blind spot. And I know it's not just me who missed this. I've asked several friends who saw the film, and a lot of them didn't notice Annie up on the ceiling there either. It's only the focus shift a minute later that reveals Annie's presence in the lounge, so that it's unmissable. But here's the big question. Do we subconsciously detect Annie up in the corner anyway, in turn creating the feeling of a ghostly presence that we can't consciously identify? A very similar trick is used again once Peter is chased into the attic. We've seen the naked guy in the doorway to the garage, and we'll soon see those three people stood in the dark in the attic who scare Peter into jumping through the window. But when he first goes up in the attic and finds the ritualistic circle of candles, one of the naked people can actually be seen in advance at the back of the room. Her face is covered by a support beam. When Annie first came up here, she saw a white mannequin among the junk. So that was probably misdirection too, causing us to disregard this particular figure as a mannequin as well. The ghostly coloration of the naked people also makes them look like mannequins. And that brings me on to another subject, the multiple foreshadows of beheading. Here, the headless mannequin is seen right before we see the dead body of grandmother. It's like a direct announcement, letting us know what we're about to see. There's the swift camera turn and stop against a post when Peter and Charlie are on their way to the party before she dies by having her head knocked off against this very same post. So this camera move here is like a forceful impact against the post itself. And of course the little Paimon demon sign is on there, which we don't understand the meaning of until later in the film, on the first viewing that is. Then there's kids watching old black and white footage of a beheading in some horror movie on a laptop. That's right before Charlie dies. Very obviously that's a foreshadow of Charlie's death, but look at the creepy expressions on these guys' faces when they ask.
Is your sister hot?
And here in Annie's studio, a painting of a woman with half of her head missing because it goes off the edge of the canvas. Another technique used in the film is to have multiple things that happen at the very same time, so that we only notice one thing while missing one or two others. In hypnosis it's called overload, because we're unable to process it all at once, and so some of the implications sink straight into the subconscious, bypassing the usual rational defence. In fact, the story itself carries this as part of the framing. The family has the trauma of grandmother's death, and while they're still processing that, they have an even greater trauma of Charlie's death. In real life, nervous breakdowns are often caused in this way, multiple traumas occurring simultaneously or in very close proximity. It can emotionally and intellectually overload a person and drive them to near insanity. And the same is done to Peter at the end of the film. He's already had the devastating loss of his sister and the misplaced feelings of guilt that go with it. Then he finds father's burned body, and he knows it's mother who has done this because she had once almost burned him alive in bed. Then he discovers the presence of occultists, and then he sees mother not just levitating but hacking her own head off. And as if that wasn't enough trauma all at once, 3 smiling occultists in the dark. It's personal trauma overload for Peter, and it's a kind of horror overload for the audience. But this technique of overload occurs on a much smaller scale in many scenes. For example, when Mother chases Peter from in a corner, we hear a demonic growl, but it's disguised by a musical jolt, so that we're not quite sure if we imagine that growl. A variation on this earlier too. Creepy Charlie shows up breathing like a demonic entity, which is what happens with Mother in the second seance scene.
What's up? Are you okay?
It's hard to breathe.
Peter, being stoned, must be a bit freaked by this, but it turns out to just be her allergy to nuts kicking in. But we are given a few seconds to wonder if she's possessed or something. So what else? Well, foreshadowing, which is hinting in advance that something is going to happen, that's generally a good thing in horror because it creates a feeling of doom, a notion that the suffering or death of the characters is predetermined and thus unavoidable. Hereditary capitalises on this in lots of ways, including the aforementioned foreshadows of decapitation. Another powerful one is that Mother chasing Peter into the attic and then kneeling on the ceiling while rapidly banging her head on the locked attic door, that's foreshadowed in at least 2 earlier scenes. The most obvious foreshadow of this is the totally out of place piece of cinematography here. Aside from creating a sense of disorientated reality, there doesn't seem to be any logic other than perhaps the demon Paimon invisibly watching from above, then swooping down to the floor, which is what possessed Annie will do later. But it's not the only foreshadowing in this little scene. The ghostly silhouette of Annie banging rapidly on this door as we pull back and see a ritualistic setup of Peter. This foreshadows the banging on the attic door as Peter hides in the ritualistic setup of the attic. The other piece of foreshadowing I spotted in relation to all this is much earlier, and it's not so obvious. At the team party, specific attention is given to the rapid chopping of vegetables by one of the girls. There's not much logic in emphasising this little detail of the scene, as it has no overt plot reference, not that I know of, and the girl chopping the vegetables, I don't think she's significant in the story in any way either. But confirmation of my suspicion that this was a foreshadow came when I saw the 20-odd minute making of documentary on the Hereditary Blu-ray. At one point, the hacking of the vegetables, Annie banging on Joan's door, and Annie banging her head on the attic door, these are all spliced together in the edit. And then I checked the online trailers for the film and found it was used in some of those as well.
Charlie! Charlie!
Please stop.
Mom?
Charlie!
Mom? What's happening?
Okay folks, time for a commercial break here. For those of you who are not aware, over at my website, which is collativelearning.com, I've got a ton of videos and articles and audio files on film analysis and psychology and so on, which are available for digital download. And these are items that are mostly not available for free on YouTube or any other platform. You have to order the items one by one according to which ones you want to watch. And the items which are available to order are available on the film analysis page and here, which is the insight page. That page contains videos and articles and some audio files on psychology. There's a ton of psychology stuff there. There's stuff on video games. There's a couple of items on art, such as the H.R. Giger artwork. There's a huge study of his work on there. So say you wanted to make some orders and you were interested in the H.R. Giger one, you click view product and you have a little read up, you check out the price, and if you like it you say I want this, and the item jumps up in there into the corner, and you can stack items up there in the corner. Let's say you went back to my previous page and you went to the film analysis page, and say you wanted the Abyss. You click I want this, and you can see that the items are stacking up there in the corner. So let me just take you through some of the other things we got. I've got a big video on the movie AI Artificial Intelligence, which, as most of you will know, is a Kubrick and Spielberg collaboration, massively underrated film. So I've got a 147-page analysis of that film in PDF form, but it's got a whole bunch of supporting videos with it. Got lots of stuff on the Alien films, militarism in the movies of Jim Cameron, 2-hour video. Stuff on The Exorcist, a 2-hour video on Eyes Wide Shut called The Cult of Eyes Wide Shut, and in that one I explore all of the various conspiracy interpretations of Eyes Wide Shut, and I assess which ones have got merit and which haven't, and give you my final conclusions on that. Let's see, there's Full Metal Jacket, tons of Kubrick stuff here, a huge study on Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, Nightmare on Elm Street, 2.5-hour analysis, Predator, 2-hour 20-minute analysis, stuff on Pulp Fiction, RoboCop, Risky Business, Saving Private Ryan, Scarface, lots of stuff on The Shining, Silence of the Lambs, Starship Troopers, tons of stuff here for you to sink your teeth into. So if you're ever bored with waiting around for me to post new content, because sometimes it takes me a few weeks between projects, then just head over to the site and place a few orders. And once you've picked the items that you want and they've stacked up in the corner there, you click pay. And you can select to use your credit card or PayPal. It's all secure. I've been using this selling system for many years now, and there's never been a problem with people's personal data being breached or anything like that. And if there's ever a difficulty with the order, you can contact me very easily. There's a short video explaining how to place the orders and a little bit of a write-up here about it as well. Okay, so if you're interested in that stuff, then head over to my website, which is collativelearning.com. And now, back to the video. So there's all kinds of psychological trickery at work in Hereditary. I'm now going to take you through the film chronologically and point out some of the other examples. These are certainly not all of them, but they're ones that I find interesting. I'm sure there's lots that I haven't even found yet. Right at the beginning of the movie, our first shot is of the treehouse, seen through the window of Annie's studio, and there's a single solitary fly crawling about on the window ledge. It takes off, silently flies around, that's important, and then it heads off in the direction of the family house model, which is where the camera then starts moving to. So is this a fly-on-the-wall silent observer symbol? Is it a clue that the demon Paimon himself is already buzzing around this family? Is it a metaphor of characters being trapped in the house, being that the fly can't escape? Or is it a clue that there are some dead people or animals already hidden somewhere in the house, being that lots of flies are in the attic when Annie finds what is presumably her mother's body? In the funeral scene, we start with a picture of Annie's mother, Ellen, looking all regal. When I first saw this image in the cinema, it really gave me the creeps. It almost seemed like Ellen was moving in the picture, even though she isn't. But on detailed study of the scene, I noticed that the big framed picture itself moves between shots. We pan around Annie, giving her speech, and the picture is facing slightly away from her. And a minute later, the picture is turned slightly toward her, so that it faces the camera and dominates the shot. Continuity error or thematic? I'm 50-50 on it. But I will point out at least one continuity error later in the film that is definitely intended. In Mother's coffin, there's a sort of sunray design, perhaps a rise from the grave metaphor. As we see in the ending, Paimon can possess the dead and have them move about. So was Ellen actually dug up by the cultists, or did Paimon manage to open the grave himself? In Annie's studio, next to that suspicious picture of a woman with half her head missing, there's a dark image of a blue figure that appears to be holding a book. I've no idea who that is, but it's quite creepy, so I suspect it's a little subliminal implant about a demonic presence. Oh, and there's some really oddball sketches of faces here too. When Annie sees an apparition of her mother in this same room a few scenes later, some of these pictures are visible again, but darker, and the camera position cuts to look at Annie from exactly where her mother's apparition was stood, like Annie is still being watched even though the apparition disappeared. That's very sneaky. Another one about the implied ghostly presence of Grandma is when there's a cut from one scene to a shot of the miniature version of Annie's bedroom, with the figure of her mother Ellen entering the room. When I first saw the movie, this moment had a very faint jump scare effect on me, because for a split second, when the image initially registered, I thought it was Annie's actual bedroom and not the miniature version. Then the presence of Annie's giant hand confirmed the latter. By the way, I've hardly mentioned the miniatures in this video because I'm planning a separate video on that subject, being that there's a hell of a lot to it. Oh, by the way, something Hereditary shares with some of the scariest horror movies of all time is that lots of its scenes happen in or near bedrooms and in association to sleep states. The Exorcist and A Nightmare on Elm Street are great examples of this too. These films embed themselves in the subconscious in a way that is triggered later in the context of the viewer's own bedroom in real life. So how many people, like myself, watched Hereditary and then for nights afterwards went to bed and had visions of Annie burning them alive, or Grandma and other occultists watching with creepy grins from dark corners of the room? I mean, even in Grandma's bedroom, the triangle drawn on the floor has 1 foot of her bed inside of it. Jumping ahead, a simple bit of visual trickery. After Charlie's head is taken off by a post, Peter stops the car and we don't get to see Charlie's dead body, and neither does Peter because he goes into denial and can't look. But the red tail lights get used in a way that to me gives a subliminal impression of flowing blood, both in this shot and the wing mirror shot here. Charlie wearing a red sweater all the time may have been done also to suggest a decapitation and thus flow of blood from the neck downwards. Maybe even an indication that the beheading was inevitable. I mean, aside from decapitations and Annie's sweater and the occasional prop, the colour scheme of the film mostly avoids the use of red. So when it does appear, it stands out. Regarding the ongoing influence of Grandma's spirit, when traumatised Peter gets home, leaving dead Charlie in the car, he sneaks to his bedroom to avoid waking Mother and incurring her wrath. Again, that thing about nasty things happening when people are asleep. But in a very, very slow shot, the camera lingers on this particular door instead of directly following Peter and keeping him in shot. I wasn't sure of the point of that when I first watched the film. It seemed like a waste of celluloid, until I explored the layout of the house and realised that this was actually Grandmother Ellen's locked bedroom, the same room that Annie has her husband lock earlier in the story, out of fear of her mother's apparition. And Peter himself finds this door has somehow opened itself at the end of the movie, and he fearfully slams it shut. Going back, after he's left Charlie's dead body in the car and he goes to bed, we dissolve to his face in bed in the morning, where he looks sort of dead-eyed as he hears his mother find the body and start screaming. And then we cut to Charlie's severed head in a mirrored arrangement of Peter's head. I suppose you could say he's been emotionally decapitated by what happened. And the sound of Mother's voice screaming as we see the gaping open mouth of Charlie, that sort of comes off like Charlie herself is screaming in terror at her own death. Jumping ahead again, the family are struggling to cope with the loss, and someone, almost certainly a cultist, puts a seance brochure through the letterbox. A little subliminal suggestion in advance of Joan coaxing Annie into a seance session. Actually, it's not just a subliminal detail directed towards Annie by the cult, it's a clue for us as to the larger plot. The cult are already trying to persuade Annie into the seance trick to get her son possessed. Note that the hands in the picture are holding a bright source similar to the sun, with spiked flares all around it, and a sky in the background. And the Paimon statue at the end of the movie has this design too, as did Grandmother's coffin. Sun symbols. And the sun is emphasised when Joan persuades Annie in the parking lot to go to a seance scene at her place. Oh, also, in response to a video I made about the seance scene itself, a few fans of my videos mentioned to me that Joan has several chalkboards in the back of her car here. They are made particularly visible by the back door of the car being open and by the prominent labels on them which are orientated the right way up to be readable for us, just in case we don't get the message. Note that these are large chalkboards which would make space for longer messages than the one shown in the seance that Annie witnesses, and these chalkboards weren't owned by Joan's grandson as she claims this one is. So obviously she could be talking to any spirit and even getting detailed instructions from Paimon himself. Another more general theme is the presence of very drab-looking landscape pictures present in Annie's house and Joan's apartment. Often they're in black and white, and they seem to be more like historical record pictures rather than decorative adornments, but they also establish mood, the sense of depression and isolation, well, basically doom and gloom that the characters feel throughout the movie. To have really nice pictures of, I don't know, beaches or beautiful forests and jungles brightly lit, it just wouldn't fit with the emotional tone of the characters. Next up, one of the creepiest scenes is Annie's sleepwalking nightmare about burning her son alive. It starts with Annie seeing a trail of ants coming through the window, and that trail leads to Peter, who is dead in bed. But when we first see the ants, there's a little image of what looks like a road map. It's an odd thing to have in the shot, so I suspect the implication is that these ants have travelled here all the way from where Charlie was killed on the nearby road. A little later, when Annie sees the automatic drawing happening on Charlie's bed, a drawing of a face, right screen, has its eyes pointing in Annie's direction. That's kind of creepy, isn't it? Next up, Annie looks at her mother's photo albums and finds pictures of Joan and her mother involved in occult rituals. Her mother has her eyes sort of blacked out, similar to Peter's eyes being crossed out in the drawings and in the photo placed ritualistically in the attic. Does this mean that Grandma was possessed at some point? And then this family photo, which the occultists use as part of their ritual. Peter separated from the family, which is the cult's intention, and Charlie looking off in the distance to something that the rest of the family aren't seeing. Ghosts perhaps, or occultists. That's the family all over, isn't it? Jumping ahead again, that scene where Annie bangs on Joan's door having discovered that Joan knew her grandmother. As the scene ends, Annie runs off screen, and instead of turning to follow her, the camera simply stops on the opposite door, a room 202 for some reason, which has some sort of detector pointing at where Annie was, and the little red light flashes on it. Is that a camera or something? I don't know what it's there for, but it seems to be emphasised for some reason. Next up, Steve, who is a psychiatrist, though it's not really explained in the movie, he's sending an email to a colleague about his wife. The colleague's name is Robert Mason. Hey, who knows, maybe that's a Freemasonic reference. I mean, the film does have sun symbol stuff here and there as well. Onward and upward, this naked guy, the first cultist that Peter sees after finding his dad's dead, charred body, this cultist isn't looking at Peter. He's looking up into the very corner where possessed Annie is sneaking to so that she can chase Peter into the attic. It's a detail that's easy to miss. When Peter is chased, the ladder is suddenly down, even though it wasn't when he was making his way downstairs. So the plan was to get him up here after all, with the ladder possibly pulling itself up magically. It seems to pull up too quickly. In the attic, the dead body is gone, and the mannequin that was there earlier has been turned over. Of the 3 naked people he sees up here, one of them is almost certainly the woman who was watching Charlie in school. Both of them make pretty much the same hand gesture. And I think, but I'm not sure, that the guy in the middle here might be one of Pete's school teachers. I'm 50-50 on that, I don't know. And on to the ending and Pete's possession. I didn't spot the dead dog in the garden when I first watched the movie, nor did I notice the 2 headless bodies facing the Paimon statue actually turn around between shots to face possessed Peter himself. A continuity error that certainly appears to be deliberate. Oh, and that's another factor in this movie. Paimon is able to move about rapidly but with total silence, like when Mother Spider runs out the room here without making a single sound, and even the door doesn't creak. So there you go, Hereditary is full of psychological trickery, with the examples in this video being just a fraction of what's on offer. So next time you watch the movie, pay close attention, and make sure to go out and get a copy if you haven't got one already. It's great, so please support the filmmakers. You've been listening to Rob Ager. Check out my website collativelearning.com for more videos and articles on film analysis, psychology and other subjects. Bye for now.